1 in 7 adolescents experience mental health disorders. This amounts to approximately 166 million adolescents globally. But human nature is such that when we hear statistics, we're at a loss to connect empathetically. Just too many numbers and too many large numbers. So just for this reason, I'm putting a voice to this phenomenon in this episode. The incredible mother-daughter team, Katie Farinas and 14-year-old Anna, are here to talk about the struggles of mental health issues, why it took them so long to recognize the symptoms, how they had to search for solutions themselves, and most importantly, what teachers and parents can do to relieve other teenagers who are suffering from this often invisible and incapacitating crisis they're living with. Katie is going to share what it was like for a mother to watch her daughter change before her eyes, and from Anna, what it's like to try to function in and outside of school with debilitating anxiety. This conversation is going to change your life, and that you're going to understand so much more clearly why we need to intentionally address emotional health first, because if not, the message our children are getting, whether we mean it or not, is that our agenda is all that really matters, while they're drowning in an incomprehensible loop. I know this is very dramatic, but you'll see how true this is as you listen to Anna's narration of what she's been through. You can hear other informative conversations just like the one you're about to listen to at Doodles with Donna, and team building activities that will help you to help your students alleviate stress in the classroom at scaffoldingmagic.com. So let's not waste another minute and find out how mental health issues are seen from the inside out and how we can make the whole issue more transparent. Katie and Anna, welcome. So, Katie, you're here with your daughter so that we can talk a little bit about the effects of social media on teenagers today. Is that pretty much accurate, or can we widen the band of what we're going to talk about today?
Oh, I think we can widen the band to generalize mental health in teens.
All right. So where would you like to start with this? Because your daughter Anna is here, which is an incredible gift to other teenagers, because what we're hoping is that she might be able to shed light on some of the experience she's had and the ways that she's been able to overcome these experiences. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Because what we don't want to do is just delve into what her experiences are, but rather things, techniques, strategies, things you've learned through the specialists that you've met with over the past how many years that have helped Anna confront all these issues and overcome them to a certain extent, right? Okay, so first of all, how many years are we dealing with the mental health issues?
I mean, my anxiety started when I was very young, but when it got more severe, I think I was 12 and I'm 14. So the past 2 years have really been the main thing, but I've been struggling since I was about 8.
All right. So Katie, let's start then. What were the signs that you saw that Anna was having problems, and what did you do at first?
So, sometimes it's hard to discern what's happening. And Anna was, as a young child, an extremely happy young child, an extremely grateful young child. She just was always very excited about life, very excited about doing everything. But she also always kind of struggled socially. She was always a very sensitive child, extremely sensitive. And so I think from a young child, I saw how her sensitivity made it hard for her to kind of interact with other people and feel comfortable in social settings. And so I always saw that, but yet she still seemed to be thriving. She had friends, she was doing well in school, she overall seemed happy. And then around age 8, she started getting migraines. And those became much worse around age 11. And they kind of went from these a couple of times a week for a few hours at a time, and they would self-resolve to every day, all day, nonstop. And so we started going to see doctors and, trying to figure out what was going on and how we could treat them and get her better. As this is all going on, then we hit pandemic. She's pulled out of school, they're homeschooling, lockdown, all that kind of stuff. And she had a group of friends that group kind of fell apart during the pandemic because they were all separated and they were only communicating through text messages and FaceTime and things like that. And the whole group fell apart. And she was struggling terribly with insomnia. And so the headache program that I took her to had her also see a psychiatrist and a therapist for cognitive behavioral therapy and that type of thing. And so I thought the changes that I was seeing in her were related to the fact that she was struggling with this pain condition and not sleeping. But then over time, she started saying more and more things that made me concerned that we were entering a different territory. And so it was a very gradual change and a very confusing change because she was also dealing with a physical problem at the same time she was dealing with a mental health problem. And at first the question was, is the mental health, what appears to be decline in mental health, related to the fact that she's struggling so much with this physical condition? Or is this almost a separate beast on its own? And so ultimately, what wound up coming out was that she had pretty severe OCD and anxiety from a very small child that she just was able to mask, and I never knew. And what started out as being this physical problem that we were trying to overcome, the mental health issues wound up way overshadowing the physical problem. And we were taking a deep dive into treating that. Even though the migraines were still a problem and to this day are still a problem, the mental health stuff became even a much larger problem.
All right. So Katie, this is really important, the part where you're watching your daughter change a little bit. She's becoming more anxious. She needs help. She needs cognitive behavior therapy, which I'd love to clarify. I know a little bit about how much you've researched this. You have your own podcast and you're going to be researching it even more and looking at it from many different aspects. And Anna, you might be participating in that. What I'd love to know is how much did you reach out to friends? How much support did you get from friends and family at this point? Or were you feeling that you couldn't really share a mental health element about your own daughter? Did you feel any pressure not to say anything?
Struggles with mental health are something that have been in my family of origin pretty extensively. And so I grew up talking about these things. These things they were not a hush hush topic at all. And so I felt comfortable talking about it. It was just a very confusing time. Like she always loved school. She stopped wanting to go to school. Okay, is she not wanting to go to school because she's exhausted from the insomnia and she's in pain from the migraine? Or is she not wanting to go to school because she's like, her mental health is shutting down? There was just a lot of confusion as to what was really happening. And so, no, I spoke to friends. I spoke to family members. I spoke to doctors. I spoke to everyone. And I have to credit really her psychiatrist was amazing at like just digging a little deeper and trying to get at what was really happening and uncovering what was really happening. And there's a lot of surveys that she had to take. And of course, many meetings with her and long conversations. And over time, Anna would start telling me things that actually had been going on in her mind for years, but she'd never told me before. And every time she came forward with a new symptom, I would have to go right back to her psychiatrist and say, this is what she told me. What's going on? What do I do about this? So her mental health team was extremely important to getting us through this.
All right, and Anna, from your perspective, do you have a very close relationship with your mother now? Did you have it before? Was it difficult for you to talk about this with your mother?
I am very close with my mom, but it was not her specifically. I just didn't like talking about these things. I didn't tell anyone. And when I did tell people things, it was her and her only. Things I would tell her, I didn't even tell my therapist sometimes because it's just a different relationship. But I was at such a bad point in my life. I guess in a way I felt embarrassed of what I was experiencing because I didn't know what it was. And it was odd. And so I just didn't tell anyone, which now I can see was not a good choice, but we got there.
You didn't know any differently, obviously, but can you tell us a little bit about what the changes were? I can't say before and after because there's never going to be an after. It's always going to be something you're probably going to be dealing with. Can you tell us a little bit about how you experienced the changes, getting more anxious, getting more symptoms about mental health?
Yeah. So at first, I've always loved school. I love learning. I love being there. And over time, I started dreading going to school because of the people. My social anxiety was through the roof. I never wanted to be there. I would have multiple panic attacks a day in school. I would be in the nurse constantly for that. My love for school just changed and I hated being there, which now, luckily, I love going to school again. But it was really rough all of 8th grade because I just could not stand being there. And I was just so caught up in my head, I couldn't enjoy anything. Even if it was something that normally made me happy, I couldn't enjoy it.
All right. So we're underlining the fact that in school, content is really not important unless you feel comfortable emotionally, unless your emotional needs are being taken care of. What kind of things, when you're saying social anxiety, what are some of the things that made you really uncomfortable?
I was always so terrified of what people thought of me. Were they watching me? Were they judging me? What were they thinking? And I focused on that so much that I couldn't even focus on my schoolwork. I experienced many toxic people in middle school, and they also contributed to that because they made me feel bad about myself. I was very insecure about how I looked. And so that was also a huge thing. I was always constantly thinking they're judging me. They think I look weird, this and that. And all of that combined, it was just so much pressure that I just never wanted to be there.
So let's understand what a toxic person is, because someone's toxic for you is not toxic for me. What would you consider, Katie? Can you give us some parameters of what toxic people are?
So, I mean, I think at the age of middle school and even through high school, it's, kids are at that developmental stage where peers are very important. They're very concerned about what their peers think and what their peers are doing and that type of thing. And she just unfortunately had a lot of people who were not nice to her. They bullied her, to be quite honest, in the things that they would say or do, excluding her, saying mean things to her. And she didn't have the buffer of other close friendships. So the friend group that she had through grade school and leading into sixth grade that had fallen apart during the start of the pandemic, she wasn't finding her way into a new friend group. And so I think she felt, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like just very, very isolated because she had these people who were not being nice to her. And she didn't have the buffer of a close friend or friends to kind of give her that I'm all right feeling. Like, even though that person's being mean, like I have this support and I'm okay because this person is my friend. And at the same time, her OCD was becoming much more severe. And a big component of OCD that I think is not popularized in like culture, if you're not very familiar with OCD, you may not be familiar with the fact that it's not just the physical compulsions like washing your hands or tapping or things like that, but it's the mental compulsions. So she was having a lot of compulsive thoughts and intrusive thoughts that I think were drawing her more and more into herself and away from the outside world. And I don't know. I think maybe kids could pick up on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I was so distracted all the time that I must have looked weird and been acting a little bit strange because I was never 100% there. No matter where I was, who I was with, what time of day it was, I was always so stuck in my head. I could never truly be myself with anyone. And it must have come off as a little strange. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she just, I think, did not like herself. She really judged herself very, very harshly. And so she's already internally judging herself very harshly. And then she has these external voices that are also judging her. And it just was very challenging.
At any point, did you feel comfortable going to any of the teachers or to the school counselor?
Never. My middle school was not a very comforting place. Like there was never anyone, any teacher, any guidance counselor, anybody that I felt like I could go and talk to. Not even the nurse. She was very sweet, but even her, when I was having a panic attack, I didn't feel comfortable opening up to her. Like it just wasn't an environment that you felt safe in to go and talk to someone.
So Katie, do you think that this is lack of training on the part of the teachers, lack of awareness that the teenagers in the school really needed more emotional support?
I think it's a combination of factors, as always, but I do think that teachers need a lot more mental health training and how to help kids who are struggling. Some of it, I think, was a symptom of our culture. Honestly, there's a lot of people walking around with borderline mental health disorder and borderline anxiety and depression, and they're functioning, they're getting through their lives, but they're not thriving.
What I'm wondering, is there any relationship you had with teachers? Did they say anything to you, Katie, or did they help you at all, Anna, in school?
I talked to, I don't know if she's a guidance counselor. What,
Mrs. Palmer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I talked to her a few times about friend issues when I was being bullied a little bit in third grade, but never mental health because I didn't know what it was. And at the time I wasn't depressed. I just had these tics, or well, not tics, compulsions, but what we thought were tics. And so I don't think it ever even crossed my mind to talk to someone about it.
What were your panic attacks like? In your head, what was going on?
Well, I honestly didn't think about actual things when they were happening. A lot of times they would happen with no cause that I knew of. I wasn't currently stressed about something or stressing about something. They would just happen. And in my mind, all I could think about was, I can't breathe. I feel like I'm dying. I can't do this anymore. Like, just completely giving up in my brain, just bad thoughts. And sometimes they would result in what people typically picture a panic attack looking like shaking, not able to breathe, crying on the ground. And sometimes they would be completely internal, and all this would be going on, but I would not be having the physical symptoms. I would just be so zoned out. You could be calling my name right in front of my face and I wouldn't hear you because I was that locked in. And I feel like those are more anxiety attacks. I feel like they're kind of different.
I think, like, coming back to what schools can do, I think the biggest thing that schools can do is to create a climate and a culture where kids feel comfortable going to their teachers, going to their counselors, going to whoever, and even speaking to each other. Like, we create this climate where we can even talk about our struggles with our peers, because this is so well accepted and so just part of this school, right? This is just part of the culture here. We all know that we have people who struggle with mental health, and it's not a stigma. It's not, there's something wrong with that person. It's just part of life, and we should all be supporting one another. And I think that's the biggest thing that the schools can do, because, a teacher can't be expected to know what's going on inside a child's mind. I mean, obviously, if she was shaking and falling on the ground in the middle of class, yes, that would be a very obvious sign that something's going on. I think, and especially teenagers, they are very stealth. They really can hide things extremely well. And even if you're a very tuned in, tapped in parent or teacher who's really trying to pay attention, it's very hard.
It's very hard. And there's a really interesting conversation I had with Stephanie Bacon, who's doing her doctorate on the socio-emotional problems that teachers have. So we have this assumption that teachers are trained not just in the content, but on the emotional aspects. And it's just not true. I mean, unless they've had specific training, most teachers don't know what to do. I was in a classroom when one girl had an anxiety attack. The teacher had no idea what to do. She actually started laughing because she was so nervous. I felt awful for her, and I was in high school. What we need to do is give them more training.
I don't know if this is feasible, but someone disclosing that they are struggling with these types of issues requires a trust-based relationship, which is often hard to develop in a teacher-student scenario just because there's one teacher and many students. And I'm sure that happens, but it's not going to happen with every student. So I don't know if there are options for students getting surveys where they can be asked about their mental health and what they may be struggling with in the school setting. And then that can be passed on to counselors who can then call parents and say, hey, we did this survey in school and your child identified that they are struggling with these things. So that's just something I'm throwing out there as a possibility, because maybe we would have picked up something sooner. I don't know.
And what you're saying also is maybe the counselors need to be a little more proactive, but they also need to be trained in what we're seeing these days. Is there anything that teachers could have picked up on had they been trained in it?
Yes, 100%. I'm in high school now, and that school is so amazing with mental health. It's insane. It's completely different. I really wish I had these tools in middle school, but in middle school when I was struggling, I didn't. I mean, there were so many times I was completely zoned out. A teacher would be calling my name in my ear and I wasn't reacting because I was stuck in an anxiety attack. You'd think something was wrong. I had no friends at that point in my life. I'd spend my lunch and recess time in the library alone reading while everyone was outside. That's clearly, a little different. I was literally the only one who did that. And I look at pictures of myself from that time, and my face, you can see it even through a picture. I look drained. I look pale. I look sickly. There was like a physical illness going on is what I look like. You could tell just by looking at me that there was something wrong, but never did a single teacher ever bring anything up.
And I understand that as much as our tendency may be to find someone to blame, it may be misdirected if we look at teachers without understanding. Although 3 years without any teacher addressing what seemed like a student floundering in front of them, like you, Anna, is certainly worrisome. But teachers are stretched to the limits themselves most of the time, along with this grueling curriculum that often goes against their instincts and inclinations. They're facing this huge number of school children that are developing mental health issues like anxiety and depression, just like you. And there's a woeful lack of training in this regard. It's very similar to police training, where police are called to resolve conflicts of virtually every kind. But most people don't know that they're actually trained in very few types of conflicts, and above all, not the psychological ones. But society looks at teachers in a similar light. Because they work with children, the assumption is that they're trained for every circumstance, and that's simply not the truth. And frankly, even if we were, the ratio of teacher to student is simply not conducive to an effective atmosphere of the trust needed to navigate mental health issues. It's rising exponentially. So, Anna, tell us about what's happening in high school. How do you feel emotionally supported aside from all the help you're getting outside of school?
Yeah, so at school, everyone is assigned a guidance counselor. There's many of them, and you are required to meet with them. Teachers are so open about it. We just had a mental health day where teachers came up on stage and we were in the auditorium and they talked about their experiences with mental health. And there was this whole fundraiser thing where you would walk the track to show your support for mental health. And there were necklaces you could wear. So the green one was like, I struggle with my own mental health. Blue one is I support people with mental health. And the purple was like, I have family who struggles with mental health. And all day people were wearing these necklaces. And you could see like people were not afraid to show that they were struggling. There were so many people with green necklaces on. No one was afraid to show that something was wrong. There's support groups at school, anxiety and depression groups that meet all the time. There's a wellness center that you are allowed to go to at any time. There's a therapist in there and lots of like drawing and just like a very relaxing state.
There's mindfulness Mondays where they do yoga and meditation.
Yeah, there's just so many resources.
It sounds like everybody is making it more transparent. And I know this is a passion of yours, Katie, to make mental health issues more transparent. And I really do think this is happening after the pandemic. I mean, I was giving workshops online to teachers, and I had been giving these workshops beforehand, explaining how important that we address the emotional health in the classroom first. But nobody really took it seriously until the pandemic, when that is the first thing you need to do. Should we address the social media issue now? Because that's definitely taking a role in her life now, right?
I have been pretty passionate about my kids not having social media for a long time. And that is not like the general consensus. Most kids, at least in the area where we live,
every kid.
Every kid.
Media.
Sorry.
Every kid. Yeah.
Except for Anna.
Except for Anna, poor Anna. Oh no, she has a phone.
Yeah.
She has a phone. Yeah. We
Okay.
just don't allow social media.
Mhm.
So, and I feel like had I allowed that when Anna was really in the darkest of her dark days, it would have been disastrous.
I agree.
Yeah.
Because of messages that she might have received. The other students who were bullying at her in school, they would have been bullying her online, is what you're saying.
They could have bullied her online. They could have just the social comparison, like, oh, look, everybody else is out doing this really fun thing. And why wasn't I invited? Or she had a lot of difficulty accepting her body. So a lot of body image issues, looking at all these photos of girls that she may consider to be, have perfect bodies, or, why doesn't my body look like that? Or there's just a lot of comparisonitis going on, I call it. And there can be a lot of like feeling left out. So I did not allow it. I'm very grateful. I had that stance before I even knew that she was going to go down this path. But even now, I still don't allow it. So I'm not sure when I will make that transition, but
I'm 18.
Yeah. But I would love to see a law passed that kids can't have social media until after the age of 18. Their frontal lobes are not developed. You're not even developed until your mid-20s. And I feel like social media is a tool. We talk about this all the time. Social media is a tool. And just like any other tool, it can be used for good or bad. It's not social media itself, right? Social media just is. It's just a tool. It's neutral. It is not good. It is not bad. It is how you use the tool. But at their age, their use of the tool is very unrefined, and where their brains are in development. And it leads to a lot of these issues with bullying, social comparison, being left out, body image issues, all the advertisements that come their way. It's a disaster.
It sounds like, Katie, that you intuitively knew that social media was not going to add anything positive in Anna's life, And what we need to remember is that this has been going on ever since the printing press began pumping out information for the masses. In the magazines that I had access to growing up, and now they're available online, they were really detrimental to our self-esteem. I mean, the studies show that there's a huge amount of gender stereotyping. For girls, for instance, the themes in magazines are usually of fashion and home, and suggestions on how to ask adults for help. While for boys, they're most likely going to be talking about jobs and motorcycles and cars and that sort of thing. And there are thousands of studies that show that girls' self-esteem is formed and negatively skewed by the images of models and these other idealized images in different types of media, in television, in movies, in clothes catalogs, things like that. And so without parental intervention, which you've done for Anna, the impressions from what girls see become a part of who they are, and their self-perception is very hard to change later. So this challenge has been around let's not get technical about it, but since the first known date of a printing press in China back in the 800s. Wouldn't you agree?
I totally agree with that. But I also think that access is a huge issue. So yes, we've always had magazines and movies and those types of things, but you had to have the physical magazine, right? And you didn't carry this physical magazine around with you 24/7, right? You had to be sitting in front of the TV to watch the movie. You didn't carry the TV around with you. You carry this around with you all day, every day. And parents are, you can link your device to your child's device. So I can see like, how often is she, on the internet? How often is she listening to Spotify, et cetera, et cetera. And parents are finding that their kids are scrolling through social media 10, 12, 14 hours a day. They are swimming in this toxic soup. And so that level of availability and access is the huge difference. And I think it is a huge difference because the amount of time we spend watching those images, soaking all of that up, definitely impacts our response to it.
Which is one of the main reasons why I encourage teachers to plan their lessons without videos, without the whiteboards, as much as possible, to plan activities in which their students are looking at each other in the eye. And it's a way to try to counterbalance as much as possible what you're talking about, Katie, the time they spend outside of class looking at the screen. As educators, we need to take full advantage of the physical presence of our students to remind them of the importance and, frankly, the magic of human interaction so they can develop those critical human skills. Because technology is taking over so many jobs, we need to remember what humans can add to the whole conversation in the professional lives. So then there's this aspect, Anna, of parental vigilance in the digital life of teenagers. How do you see their intervention? How do you see their ability to access your digital accounts?
I think it does depend on the kid, because if you have a really rebellious child, then maybe you need to monitor them a little more. I got my phone in 6th grade, but everyone else, like all my friends, everyone I knew got their phone in 4th grade, and they all had social media. And I resented my mom so much for it because I didn't have social media. Everyone had it. It was cool. I wanted it until I got my phone in 6th grade. And then I was like, it really doesn't matter. Like I let that go very quickly because I saw, even in 5th grade, how photos and videos would circulate and how friendships would fall apart over things over social media and how bad it was. And so I've never had social media, and I'm grateful for that. And I think parents should, they're your parents. You're not an adult yet. Kids are not the most mature. They don't know what's best for them. And I think it's important that parents do monitor their children, especially if they have social media, because kids, especially when they don't have anything to do, spend a lot of time on social media platforms. And I think you're hooked up to my phone. Like you can see what And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, especially if you're not doing anything wrong.
And then this question that your mother likes asking, she always says, do you want to talk about it? And she says she knows you're a closed book until you want to open up that book. But is that question important?
Oh yeah, 100%. If you are not being asked, like, do you want to talk? How are you supposed to know that person really cares and really wants to know how you're feeling? If someone just never asks you how you're doing, you are never going to want to open up to them because you feel like they're not going to be there for you. And like, I sometimes get annoyed when she asks that question because I don't want to talk about it yet, but I am very grateful that she asked that question because it just reassures that that person is there for you to listen.
And it also sounds like, Anna, that it would have been wonderful. And again, we're not condemning teachers because they have so many things going on in their professional lives, but it would have been wonderful in those 3 years if one teacher had said to you, is there something we can talk about? Is there some reason you're not responding to me? I noticed that you're looking a bit pale. Is there anything I can do? Or can I send you to the counselor? Can I have a meeting with your mom? What can I do to help you? Yeah.
Yeah, that would have 100% been helpful. And now teachers, I think they're required to know about what happened over the summer with the PHP I was in and my struggles. And so they now will ask me, are you okay? Like, are you doing okay? And that would have been just so helpful in middle school. And it doesn't take a lot to ask how someone is. It's a simple, are you okay? Do you need to talk? And I think that if teachers started doing that more, especially in middle school and high school, it would be very beneficial. Mental health in school could definitely improve because so many kids hate being there just because of anxiety and depression.
And I think, teachers need to have a lot more training. There should be some form of mental health curriculum that's weaved into our school system that talks about mindfulness, self-compassion, anxiety, depression, connectivity, the importance of connection in this world, the importance of having close, connected relationships. And if kids learn this stuff from a very young age, it would just become part of their life. It wouldn't even be something they would think about. When I was growing up, I know when my parents were growing up, kids were always together. They were always hanging out. You were riding your bikes in the neighborhood, you were at each other's houses, you were just kind of always doing something, loafing around doing something together with your friends. These days, kids do not get together in the way that they used to get together. I don't know what it is. Is it the social media? Are they home on their devices? What are they doing? I don't know what's happening, but I think it is hurting them because they are not forming these close relationships that can then buffer them from a lot of these mental health problems, because close, connected relationships are very important throughout life to protect your mental health. And as teenagers, their friends are a huge part of that. You can have a wonderful, loving, supportive, great family. You need your friends at that age. And there is some disconnect that's going on.
Yeah, I actually just for English, I had to write an essay on how social media affects teenagers. And one of the articles that I was given to research showed that a lot of kids use social media to avoid social interaction. They rather stay at home and just text their friends than go out in public. And because they're not spending a lot of time with kids in person outside of school, their social anxiety gets bad. And then when they are out in a public situation, they revert to their phones because they get anxious. And it's like a cycle that's not being broken. It's just so normal for me to see a friend just once a week instead of all the time, because kids rather be on their phones than go out.
Anna, what I'd love to know now is you're 14. What would you most want your teachers to know about how to support you, and how are you going to be moving forward?
Honestly, even if kids who have struggled a lot with mental health had a meeting with the teachers and told them what they could do to help, it might be better than just another adult telling them. They could see what things you should do to handle mental health and what things are no, don't do that. Because there are a lot of things that people do that they think are helping, but that are actually not helping. And that just makes things worse.
I'm a teacher. Tell me, what could I do differently in the classroom tomorrow to help you?
Even if you just start with hey, how are you doing? Instead of all right, let's start teaching, just something simple like that. Or what my one teacher does all the time is we have a mindfulness minute where you start your morning with mindfulness and calm before you get started. We don't have this, but something I think that would be great is a weekly check-in. If you got sent a little survey and tell me one good thing about your week and one bad thing about your week. And in the bottom, let them know if you want a teacher to reach out or a counselor to reach out. So they're more kind of roped into your life and they can see what's happening behind the scenes, because it can be really hard to go up to someone, especially a teacher, and tell them what's wrong. Again, this goes back to technology, but sometimes it is easier to just type it out or write it on paper and put it in a jar that the teacher reads, just so they can see what's going on, but you don't have to go right up to them and tell them, because sometimes that can be scary.
What about working in groups? Is that anxiety provoking for someone with mental health issues?
Last year, very. When you're in a classroom and your teacher says, all right, find a partner, and you don't have friends, it's the most anxiety provoking thing, because everyone's oh, great. And they're walking over to their partner and you're sitting there all alone. I have no one to partner up with. This is awful. And so group work can be very, very scary. Now I do have friends in my classes and I love group work, but I think that it is a very anxiety provoking thing if you don't have friends in that class or you're very socially awkward and your teacher's just like, all right, find a partner, and you're the only one sitting there. Like, that's a terrible feeling. But group work can also be very beneficial because you're forced to work with others and you're forced to interact more. So it has good and bad parts.
And when I work with teachers, I always recommend that they do team building activities before the groups start. And that should help. A lot of teachers really are aware that some students are bullied by certain other students, and they're reticent about putting them into groups. But it's important at least to try to work the challenges out, don't you think?
Yeah, it's very important. Team building, that sounds great. I think that would be a perfect idea, especially if teachers pick groups. So you're with people you like really don't know, because that can be really awkward. But yeah, group projects can definitely produce lots of anxiety.
And just a couple more questions. What about when you need to give a presentation before your classmates?
Yeah. That was horrendous. I've only had one presentation this year that didn't go well, and it was because I had to speak it in Italian, which is a language I don't know. So that was very scary. But presenting used to be horrible for me. I would ask teachers to opt out of it and I would just present to them instead of the whole class because it was terrifying. When you feel like you're constantly being judged, it's a horrible feeling. But when you are standing up there, you're the only one talking and there are like 25 sets of eyes on you. It's like a paralyzing, terrifying feeling. And I still get nervous when I have to present, but I like the saying, like, do something every day that scares you. I love doing that. And I try to do every day something that makes me anxious. I try to do it. And so that's kind of like my motto when I have to present, like, yeah, this is scaring you a little bit, but you got to do it. You can't get through life without presenting.
Is there anything else in the classroom that's going on when a teacher calls on you directly and you don't know the answer? Something else that might be anxiety provoking?
Yeah, but I've seen kids in class who struggle with anxiety start crying when they get called on and they don't know the answer and they start tearing up and their voice cracks and you can see that they are so nervous because they don't know this answer. And I think it's a good thing to keep your students engaged because they're like, oh, she's going to call on someone random. Like, I need to pay attention. But at the same time, it can really hurt someone's self-esteem. And I've seen many,
like a trauma response, really.
Yeah, I've seen many kids break down in class after being called on.
Let me ask you this question, because this is what I always recommend teachers to do. If you call on a student, you also say, if you don't know the answer, please ask your partner, because I always recommend they work with partners. So there's always a support system. And I know that there are students who don't like answering. They still need to be called on. They still need to be recognized and they still need to hear their name. But I always say, please ask your partner if you don't know the answer, and one of you can give me whatever answer you come up with. Would that change the whole dynamic and emotional response?
I 100% think so. I feel like if my teachers did that, I would just feel relieved when I got called on. And even if both of you don't know the answer, you're working with someone else. That level of anxiety is just so much less. And I think that could have saved a lot of people a lot of breakdowns in class, because then they feel so embarrassed about the fact that they were crying in class and it just spirals. And I've seen people get up and run and leave out the room. I think it'd be a lot more beneficial if that was an option.
Okay, two more questions. The first one is there any mechanics in class that I'm not thinking of that are anxiety provoking that a teacher may not realize is going on?
For me, I used to be so anxious to ask to go to the bathroom just because I'm the only one speaking. You have to raise your hand at random and then you have to get up and walk out of the classroom. I also used to be so anxious about we're taking a test and my stomach growls or my chair squeaks or I make a weird noise and I'm the only person, like it's dead silent in the room and my stomach just growled. Like that used to make me so anxious. Or when I had to get up and turn my test in, like I'm walking in front of the class while everyone's sitting, that used to make me really anxious. But these are things you have to do.
I think this is really important that you're saying these things, because teachers can think, how could I change the dynamic then so that the teenagers don't have to expose themselves? Because in your mind, it's exposing yourself.
Yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. It feels like even if no one is looking at me while I'm getting up to go to the bathroom or getting up to turn in my test, it feels like they're watching me and judging me. Even if none of them even noticed I got up, your anxiety tricks you and says, no, they're watching you, they're judging you, and you should be anxious right now.
So I really appreciate those last bits of mechanics that teachers can just consider how they could reconstruct their classrooms. And then the last question I have for you right this moment is, you have a strong relationship with your mother. What could you say to other children your age, other young adults your age, if they don't have a strong relationship with your mother? What could they do?
If they have a good environment in school and they have a close relationship with a guidance counselor or a teacher, that's obviously a really great person to go to. But then again, not all schools have that, so it's not always an option. Obviously, good friends, if you have good friends, but if you don't, it's really tricky. I've always had amazing support system with my family, but there was a time where I didn't have friends and I didn't like talking to my family, and I didn't have a good school system. So my outlet was just venting to myself. Either if I just had to write it down or talk it out to myself, like that was how I got my feelings out, because it's hard when you don't feel like you can trust anyone.
Okay, so you're saying that they really need to find someone, a counselor. What about online? Is there some outlet online that teenagers could use that are fairly safe? I don't know if you could answer that or if Katie could answer that.
There are online support groups I've heard of that they like do like a meeting call once a week, like therapy in a way, but it's like group therapy.
Yeah, I don't know about that either. I mean, that would be a nice option. And I wonder if it's something that the school could put together, like, different groups that kids could be involved in if they're struggling. And then they would meet other people who are also struggling, which essentially are forming a support group, which would be amazing. They've done a lot of studies that have shown that if a child just has one singular person in their life, and it does not have to be a relative, one person in their life who they feel believes in them and is there to support them, it is a huge protective factor against drugs, alcohol, mental health disorders, suicide. So if the school can develop anything in any way that could at least just help identify those kids who are really struggling, and then reach out to families to see if the families can participate. And if the families can't, then some other form of a supportive environment, I think that could make a huge difference.
So Katie, I've said it a couple of times. One of your passions right now is making all of this transparent, and you're going to be doing a podcast and talking to a lot of different experts about this. Tell us what your focus is going to be and what you're hoping to make available to people.
That's a big question, Donna. My biggest focus would, I guess, be my passion, which I've, I talk to Anna about all the time, which is, mindfulness, meditation, breath work, yoga, these practices that bring you back home to yourself and a sense of peace and inner peace and calm. As parents, we can do ourselves and we can teach our children. As teachers can do themselves and they can integrate it into their classrooms. They can create school environments, because, that whole community of mindfulness is all about self-compassion, compassion for others, and non-judgment. Right. And so if we can create a school environment that focuses on compassion, non-judgment, acceptance, and willingness to be present, fully present, and listen with another human, I think we could do a lot of good for our kids.
And it sounds like what you're doing, because of this adventure through Anna, all the things that you've had to be researching, the experiences you've had, what you're doing in this podcast is just opening up a whole conversation about all the things that are happening in the world that could help other teenagers like Anna. And it certainly is helping her, correct?
Yes. And other teenagers and adults. It could help us all. We could all benefit from this, and we could really change our way of moving through the world and what we prioritize as important. And because I think that's what needs to happen. We need to shift our priorities, because we have, for a long time in a capitalistic society, prioritized money and status and things. And we need to shift those priorities. The most important thing is love and compassion. The most important thing is loving yourself and loving others. And then everything else beautiful can flow from that. But that's that's turning our whole society on its head. And that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to turn our whole society on its head.
And I think you're on your way, Katie. Look at the example of your daughter. Because of this gorgeous human being in front of you, you've devoted the past umpteen years to helping her regain her balance in this roller coaster ride of discovering what's been affecting her mental health. And you've been working side by side, sewing up the seams that were coming undone. And it looks like both of you are now, let's keep going with this metaphor, rethreading the cloth with exactly what you're proposing, Katie. Compassion, non-judgment, self-acceptance, being present in the physical, and the immeasurable benefits of not falling prey to the temptations of social media. So I just want to thank you both so much for your honesty, for sharing from the heart that you've gifted to us, and for your willingness, Anna, especially to be both vulnerable and demonstrate the solid core you've developed because of your experiences with these mental health challenges. And Katie, are there some last words you'd like to end with?
I would say the only last thing is that if a parent is listening to this and their child is suffering, you have to have a lot of compassion for yourself as well. So, this compassion is you're giving it out, but you're also giving it to yourself, because this is a really hard thing to go through as a parent, and it's nobody's fault. It just is part of life, and you're going to learn how to navigate it and support your child and do what's best. But you really have to have compassion for yourself first, or else you can't be there. You have to put your own oxygen mask on first, or you can't be there for your child.
Okay, love it. Love it. What you've just listened to, the bare truth of it, has hopefully opened up a whole world you either didn't know existed and can confront now more empathetically, or did know existed and now you can move around more knowledgeably. Anna's lucid narration of her experiences and the obvious passion and dedication her mom has shown because of the necessity of saving her daughter's life in terms of mental health is palpable. You can hear more details of their experiences in Katie's podcast, Mom on the Verge, and we give the link below, and more conversations that skirt the myriad of educational issues on Doodles with Donna, and a course that you can take to augment mental health in your classroom or at home at scaffoldingmagic.com. So have fun in your classes and see you soon for more.